Hey everybody, Coax and Campstools here. We're going to be running through a Vibroplex Iambic key refurb today. I appreciate you watching. So this key was actually my step-grandfather's. He silent keyed in 2013. Never actually met him, but this was part of the stuff that I inherited from him. I was actually missing a couple pieces. I'll talk about that here in a second. But I wanted to get through this and just give it a nice little refurb and get it back on the air. This is a Vibroplex brass racer Iambic key. They're manufactured from, well, without the keyer in the base, which is the version I have, from 1996 to 2013, but my serial number puts it manufactured in 1992, which doesn't really make sense, so I'm not really sure when this was made, but late 90s most likely. So these are the parts that I was actually missing from my grandfather. So that small little white ball and the spring sit underneath the magnets. That's part of the magnet retention. I'll put a link in the description to the parts catalog from Vibroplex. But if you just yank out those magnets with the ball under spring tension in there, it's just going to shoot out and you're going to have to crawl to your workbench and hopefully find it, which I was able to do. 3/30 seconds. Allen keys, pulls out those little screws. What's interesting about this key is that there are no springs in it. It is purely magnetic. So these little screws, I originally tried to pull them out, but they ended up being plastic, and I wasn't too confident in how strong this plastic was, so I ended up leaving them in. I used some calipers to make sure that they were sticking out the same amount, and then moved on. This is everything I use to clean it. So I have some Simple Green, according to Vibroplex, that's what they recommend. Some good old CLP, cleaner, lubricant, and preservative, and then in that gold sprayer in the back is alcohol that I hit it with. So I did a pretty thorough drenching of everything in the Simple Green, trying to get rid of every oil, grime, everything I can get off of this. So we saw in that once over, this is actually what Vibroplex describes as lacquer coated brushed brass. And the grooves that you see here, I actually thought that it was just a rough machining, but I guess that's the brushing that they're going for. But the lacquer was all peeling up, so I used this barkeeper's friend here to take off all of that lacquer because it was just looking pretty rough. If you have any recommendations on what I can recoat this with, or if you think I just ruined this key, go ahead and leave it in the description. I'll read it and respond to it. Hitting it with this barkeeper's friend took off that grime and the lacquer coating and actually gave it a nice golden brass look to it. I left a lot of those pegs on that top piece because I didn't know how to take them out and I didn't want to have to mess with that. And it ended up coming together fine. They had a little bit of surface rust, and hitting it with this barkeeper's friend actually took off a lot of that surface rust and helped it out. These are the little pedestals I was talking about. You can just see the lacquer coating just like peeling off this thing. We get a little bit better look after I clean this one up compared to the other one. I weighed this key. It's about 817 grams or 1 pound 13 ounces, and I actually did take it out for a POTA activation here on New Year's Day. Did pretty well. So we see here we have the clean pedestal on the right, the dirty one on the left. You can see all that lacquer just peeling off the top. Now these magnets, I ended up putting the one magnet, clamping it in a drill and just spinning it, and that worked really well, but the glue inside it wasn't very strong. I didn't even realize that it was glued actually. I tried to clean off all of the leftover Simple Green and whatever else with just some plain old soapy water. I used Dawn dish detergent, the kind with a duck on it, of course. Went through, wiped everything out, and you can see here that the containers that the magnets were in, the magnets are no longer inside. They ended up both coming out as I was working on them. The one I was able to glue back in, the other one I'm still trying to figure it out. I did have to reference this video to figure out which wire was going to which side of the brass, but I made a new cable just because this old one was dirty and twisted and was the original cable that came with it, so I didn't throw it out, I still have it. but I did want to make it look a little bit better. So I went through, pulled off the wire from the old 1/8" jack that I probably put on it years and years ago, and put a new cable on it. I didn't cut anything, as I mentioned, so I still have this cable, but you can see it's just all twisted and gross looking. This is a cable that I bought that was the wrong size for a different project, but actually worked pretty well with this, so this is what I threw in there. I tried filming me making this cable, and it just didn't go the best, so I ended up doing it off camera for the sake of not having any instructional value and me just being in a bad mood. But we got it done, and I did end up putting a piece of heat shrink here to give a little bit of strain relief, so if that cable gets jerked, it just yanks on that glue-lined heat shrink and not the actual cables. So this is how I glued these in here. The one magnet like fits tighter, you can feel it really grab in there, but the other one just doesn't want to stay in there, and actually, because it's a magnet and it is retained in that brass piece, it'll pull the magnet out of that little holder, and as soon as that magnet touches the arm of the keyer, it just doesn't work too well. Those are the little brass balls that I mentioned earlier. I wasn't exactly sure how best to hold this when I put it back together, but I eventually figured it out. So inside these little pedestals are these little plastic insulator pieces, and for whatever reason it scooted up a little bit on the one, so I did have to try to figure out how to get that down. You do just disregard what's going on the left here. You do not have to heat this up. There ended up being a extremely tiny Phillips head slot, not Phillips, flathead slot in the bottom that I was able to get up in there and unscrew and then screw back into position. And this is to stop the bolt that holds these pedestals into the brass from contacting the contact and shorting everything out. These steel pieces had a pretty good amount of surface rust, and I've never refinished steel before, so I didn't want to dive into that. You actually don't need to put the thumb pads on there before you put that on there. I had to take them off to screw them on. But these steel pieces I just had soaking in CLP for a couple days, and then I came in with an all-purpose brush that we saw here, and I gave everything a good wipe down. That did a good amount of getting rid of that surface rust. And these are the magnets that I'm talking about. So if you push those magnets too far in, that little ball will shoot up and it'll get trapped between the magnet and the brass holder, but you have to take it all apart to get that ball back in there. I just messed around with it for probably 30 minutes trying to get that ball back in there without having to take it apart, and I could not. These little Allen screws that I'm tightening here, you need to leave those a little bit loose, because if you over tighten them, the paddles won't be able to flex and those arms won't move and you won't be able to use the keyer. So as I mentioned, I had taken off the little thumb tabs to get those Allen keys in there, and then we're able to put those back on. I was referring to my drawing here. I think I pull it back out to make sure that I put the right wire on the right side so that you have the dits on the thumb. What I did neglect here was the ring I sized up to the screw, not the plastic insulator. So I did have to cut it and spread it out so that I would get the ground between the brass and my keyer. My last final step was I went through and I put just a little bit layer of CLP on all of the steel parts that I could get in there with a small Q-tip. This will just help preserve everything moving forward to stop more rust from showing up. It's been about a week since I did this video, and the keyer does look pretty good still. I am seeing a little bit of like patina showing up on the brass. So hopefully somebody watching this knows what I can put on it to stop that. But if there's nothing, a little bit of patina from my own use, not sweating it. And we're all set. Thanks for watching.